Now, I'm not going to claim that I have finally proven a long debated theory is definitely true, but a Siesta dual lighting period is something I personally have had great success with. And today I'm going to explain how this method helped me achieve really fast plant growth and massively reduce algae in my aquariums. So first, let's go back in time. I was planning my IAPLC aquarium and had just over 2 months to grow out a tank and get it ready for its photo shoot. And so I had two main goals. I wanted to establish plant growth as quickly as possible, and I wanted to ensure the tank was well balanced and devoid of any algae issues. Previously, I'd been playing about with various lighting schedules ranging from 8 to 12 hours of light, but they all had one thing in common: the plants never had a siesta. So what is a siesta dual lighting period? The simplest description is an afternoon nap for your aquarium plants. You have the lights come on in the morning, go off for the afternoon, and then come back on again in the evening. I'd say the number one reason people end up doing this is in order to fit with our human routines and desire to see the tank on our own terms. So often this means being able to see the tank in the morning for a few hours before work, and then to see it again for a sustained period in the evening. However, there are many additional benefits beyond convenient viewing times. Now, being the hip young thing that I am, my holiday reading last Christmas was Diana Walstads' Ecology of the Planted Aquarium. Yeah, I know, I'm really cool like that. I took a lot away from that book and I would highly recommend reading it, but it was her points about siesta lighting periods that fascinated me the most. Diana recommends a midday siesta and uses a 5-hour on, 4-hour off, 5-hour on photo period on her own tanks. The dark period allows CO2 levels to rise, which promotes plant growth and inhibits algae growth. Now, this is all part of a methodology for low-tech aquariums without CO2 dosing, and many would argue that in tanks dosed with CO2, like some of mine are, there is no benefit to a siesta period because you are dealing with much higher concentrations of CO2, generally about 30 parts per million in comparison with a peak of around 4.5 parts per million in a Walstad method tank. But it was one small thing that got me interested: the assertion that the reason a siesta period would help control algae is because algae are more adept at utilizing CO2 when it starts to drop to a lower concentration. Although I'm injecting CO2 on my Scapers tanks, I, like most people, will still switch the CO2 off about an hour before the lights go out. This is standard practice since plants will not utilize CO2 unless they are photosynthesizing, and the theory is that in the last hour or so you can switch off the CO2 and the plants will use the remaining concentration before the lights go out and photosynthesis stops. So my theoretical questions were these: was the last hour of depreciating CO2 concentration creating the same window of opportunity for algae as was being created in Diana Walstad's tanks? Would having 2 photo periods speed up plant growth? And would a pitch black siesta in a basement have other additional benefits in terms of reducing algae's ability to grow? Ultimately, I wasn't sure, but I saw very little harm in giving it a go. And conveniently, as with most people who try a dual lighting period, this also allowed me to make the most of my tank by being able to enjoy it more when I was not at work. So my timeline looks like this. At 6 AM the CO2 comes on, at 6:30 AM the tank lights come on, at 10:30 AM the CO2 goes off, at 11:30 AM the tank lights go off. From 11:30 AM to 6:30 PM the lights are off and the plants get an afternoon nap. At 6 PM the CO2 comes back on, the lights come on at 6:30 PM, the CO2 goes off at 10:30 PM, the lights go off at 11:30 PM, and then everything goes to sleep until the next morning when the cycle starts all over again. In brief, we have 5 hours on, 7 hours off, 5 hours on, 7 hours off every single day, with the CO2 coming on half an hour before lights on and going off an hour before lights out. So a total of 10 hours light per day interspersed with total darkness, since we're in a basement with no ambient light. Because of the lack of ambient light and the equal periods of darkness, my method is more akin to 2 days in one than it is to a siesta period that Diana Walstad was describing, and I was hopeful that this would have an impact on the speed of plant growth, since we'd be getting 2 full photosynthesis cycles crammed into one day. Now, I'm not saying that I'm some biological genius or that this is by any means a scientific study, but my observation of using this method for over 6 months is this: my plants have grown incredibly quickly in all of my tanks, some of which are on estimative index dosing and some of which have no fertilizer dosing at all. In my brand new high-tech tank, I had absolutely no algae issues and incredibly rapid and healthy plant growth. In my established beach aquascape, which has become an epistogramma breeding tank with a fairly consistent algae and biological waste buildup, I suddenly had a rapid decrease in algae growth to the point where it's almost algae-free now. In my Walstad method better tank, the plants grew rapidly and the tank has gone from having a moderate and gradual buildup of green spot algae to having no issues whatsoever. So whether an afternoon nap or 2 days in one, whatever you want to call it, actually has a benefit will remain up for debate. All I can say is I had no negative consequences from doing this. It fitted really well with my daily routine, and it's something that I'll be continuing to do. If you have more of a scientific understanding, please feel free to wade into the comments and tell me what you think. And that's the final method that helped create my Arch into the Abyss aquarium and get it ready for the IAPLC in a super tight time frame. If you want to hear me talk more about the making of that tank, you can click here. And if you're in the mood for a nice relaxing cinematic video about that tank, you can click here. Take care everyone, see you soon.